Good morning. I'm going to do something a little unusual this morning, and I guess I should mention it now. Normally, we just have one scripture for the scripture reading. I think the Lord caused me to be awake over an hour early this morning, and four scriptures came to mind. And so I'm going to share them with you, but there's a reason. I'm not trying to test your patience or your memory, but I would like to just use these four passages of Scripture as a basis this morning. The first is from Proverbs, from the 3rd chapter. Originally, I was just going to read verses 5 through 9. Hopefully be familiar to most of you, but I'm actually going to read verses 1 through 13 in Proverbs, the 3rd chapter. My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and men. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It shall be health to thy navel and marrow to thy bones. Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst with new wine. My son, despise not chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his corrections. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son, in whom he delighteth. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. And then, in my version of the inspired version, let's skip over to chapter 4, still in Proverbs, verses 1 through 7. Hear ye, children, the instruction of a father, and attend to know understanding. For I give you good doctrine. Forsake ye not my law. For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He taught me also, and said unto me, Let thine heart retain my words. Keep my commandments, and live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. Then from Jeremiah, I'd like to read a passage. And it's interesting, and I didn't look it up, but the King James Version is a little bit different, and that's the one that a lot of different churches use, but I think it's important, and this gets into the whole, Joseph Smith, I believe, was inspired to come up with what we call the inspired version, and just as a side note, and I'll mention this a little bit more detail later, that the first 9 chapters of Genesis are radically different in the inspired version. In fact, if you get the book, and I think it's called Joseph's Translation, has a side-by-side King James inspired version, and there are places where there's nothing, zero in the King James Version. But I believe that Joseph Smith was inspired to add those things back in that were taken out for whatever reason. So I'd like to read in Jeremiah, 29th chapter, the 11th through the 13th verses. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call unto me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you. And ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. And then from Matthew, the 7th chapter, 12th and 13th verses. say unto them, Ask of God. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For every one that asketh receiveth. He that seeketh findeth. And unto him that knocketh it shall be opened.
Breathe the air of heaven, where pain is gone and mercy fills the streets, to look upon the one who bled to save me, and walk with him for all eternity. Before him, there will be a day when death will be no more, standing face to face with he who died and rose again. Holy, holy is the Lord. And every prayer we prayed in desperation, the song of faith we sang through doubt and fear. In the end, we'll see that it was finished when he returns to wipe away our tears. Bow before him. There will be a day when death will be no more, standing face to face with he who died and rose again. Holy, holy is the Lord. And on that day we'll join the resurrection and stand beside the heroes of the faith. With one voice, 1,000 generations sing, worthy is the Lamb who was slain. And on that day, we'll join the resurrection and stand beside the heroes of the faith. With one voice, 1,000 generations sing, worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Forever he shall reign. So let it be today, we shout the hymn of heaven with angels and the saints. We raise a mighty roar, glory to our God, who gave us life beyond the grave. Holy, holy is the Lord, so let it be today. We shout the hymn of heaven with angels and the saints. We raise a mighty roar, glory to our God, who gave us life beyond the grave. Holy, holy is the Lord. Holy, holy is the Lord. Holy, holy is the Lord.
want to thank you for the music. It's interesting, I was thinking John had mentioned that he'd be leaving early, and he said it wasn't a reflection of my sermon. I thought, well, thank you, John, I appreciate that. But I was thinking when John said that he has to drive up to Wyoming that a long time ago, I was in the military, and I was actually stationed at Ellsworth Air Force Base in Rapid City. And we had reunions in Wyoming. They had camps in Wyoming at Wheatland, Wyoming. And we have friends from Gillette and Cheyenne, Laramie, different parts in Wyoming. And I remember that when we lived there, the Air Force told me I'd be in South Dakota, Rapid City, for 4 years. And we had a small branch there. And fortunately, our pianist was married to a navigator, and he got reassigned to someplace in England, and so they left with their 5 children. And I'm not musically inclined. I love music. Scriptures say, make a joyful noise unto the Lord. So as long as we don't sing it like a funeral dirge and drag it, I think we're good. But I remember that there were times that my daughters were little and they hadn't taken piano lessons yet, that we didn't have a pianist. And so when people would come up to tour the Black Hills or Mount Rushmore or Devil's Tower, that I'd ask, do you play the piano? And there were a number of times that we were richly blessed, that there were people that came through and played the piano. I think 1 or 2 times we had people that even did solos, which I'm not brave enough to do. I did that for one of my daughter's weddings, and I'm not sure it went really well. But she made me promise that I'd do it because I sang her the same song from the day that we brought her home from the hospital until right before she got married. And it was hard for me, but I did it because it was important to her. Well, it's interesting, as I was sitting here, actually Brian Monday asked me to preach. I think it's been a couple months ago, but I think you had, was it a branch retreat? And then there was something else that was going on, and I thought, that's fine. As is usually my custom, I pray and say, all right, Lord, what do you want me to share with the people? And it's interesting because up until early this morning, the message was going to be the same. And the message is, and the question that I'll ask each of you is, what is God calling you to do? Now, I realize that there's a newborn baby. How old is the baby? Pardon me? 3 weeks? 2 weeks? Okay, well, hopefully I don't require the baby to do anything, and I'm not going to ask who the oldest is because I'm getting up in that range. But I think it's important for each of us to think about what God is calling us to do. Because in a scripture that came to mind early this morning, actually some of you that are probably about the same age range will remember, I remember this from, I think it was the 1960s, I'm dating myself. My brother had a record, I think the musical group was the Byrds. I think the song was Turn, Turn, Turn. It was during the height of Vietnam, and my dad didn't appreciate that. And I think at a point my dad asked him to turn it down, and he may have turned it down 1 decibel, but he didn't turn it down very much. And my dad actually came in and broke the record. That was a memory. But I remember hearing that and hearing the words, and I thought, that's interesting. But the words actually come from Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, verses 1 through 10. Now, I'll read them for your hearing. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. Now, I'll confess to you that I don't totally understand all of that. You'd think that in the scriptures it would be a little bit more positive. But I know, and it was interesting, Dane, that you talked about different seasons. And I know some people believe that seasons are just, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And certainly there are 4 seasons, at least in this part of the country. There are other parts of the country that they seem to have just winter. Like when we were stationed in Rapid City, it seems like winter was 9 months long, and then we had 3 months of road construction, and those were the 2 seasons that we had. But I believe that in this, and I've been reading this for a long time, I believe that there are different seasons, just like you were talking about. What was that in section 71? And sometimes a season can be a very short period of time. Sometimes seasons can be very long periods of time. But I believe that there are different seasons of our lives. And I think that it's important for us, and even for the small children, we'll let the 2-week-old off. They won't have to take the test. I need to tell you that I am a teacher, and I like to give tests. You will have homework, and so I'll mention that at the end. Yeah, kids, you thought you were off for the summer. Wrong answer. There's still homework to do. All right, so there are different seasons, and I think that those of us that are older, I think we could basically vouch for that there are seasons, and there are seasons of our lives where maybe things are easier, and there are seasons where there are a lot of challenges. But I would encourage you, from the youngest to the oldest, to think about what God is calling you to do. One passage that I'd like to start with, is hopefully familiar to most, if not all of you, is actually from the Old Testament. It's from the 37th chapter, and this has to do with Joseph. Okay? And I'm going to encourage you, I guess, here's your first assignment, because if I went through from 37 to, I think it's chapter 50, we'd be here a long time. And I don't think you want to be here a long time. I think that Brian just asked me to preach a sermon, not do a series. And I don't know that Dane would let me go on for hours and hours and hours. So let's start in chapter 37. And in my version, it says that Joseph was hated of his brethren. He had 2 dreams. He sold to the Ishmaelites, and he sold to Potiphar. Now, and I have to tell you, okay, I've known Cindy for a long time. Cindy was actually in my older sister's wedding. My older sister's a lot older than me, I should tell you that right now. But my older sister, I think, they just celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary. Cindy was in my sister Debbie's wedding, and I had seen her, and then I had lost track probably when I was in the military. I was in the military for 12 years, and we moved 22 times in 12 years. And anyway, Cindy knows that I have 2 brothers, and I have 2 sisters. And my brothers, they weren't like the brothers, okay, that Joseph had. We're going to find out about his family, all right? Joseph, if you look in chapter 37 of Genesis, verse 3, it says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age." Now, we have 5 children, and I really try to love them all the same. They're different. My sons are in some respects different as night and day from our daughters, and that's okay. Those of you that have boys and girls, you know that you can love them and you can try to treat them the same, but they're not the same. But it was interesting that it states there that he was the son of his old age and that he loved him more than all his children. For those of you that don't know, he had 11 other brothers. So it's like he was a favorite. Well, that must have caused some hate and discontent, probably right off from the start. Well, then in verse 4, it talks about his brothers, and they hated him. That's a pretty strong word. But it's like, okay, if he was the favorite, then it was like maybe he couldn't do any wrong. But it was interesting that they go on, and Joseph had 2 dreams. there in chapter 37, and he shared them with his brothers. And he said the first one in verse 7, that we were binding sheaves in the field. And lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood around about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. Well, then he had another dream, and it's basically the same thing. So do you think that made his brothers change their mind? You think they loved him more and more because of the dreams? No, that probably drove a wedge. But it's interesting how God used that, and we're going to find out in a few chapters that actually came true. Now, I don't imagine that his brothers were real happy with that. We're going to find out that his brothers decided to throw him in a pit when he went out to help them. Threw him in a pit. Well, then they thought, hey, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and get him out of here. Reuben was glad that they didn't kill him. Some of his brothers wanted to kill him, but that would have really frustrated God's plan. And stay tuned. We're going to find out what God's plan was. So anyway, his brothers, they threw him in a pit, and then they sold him to the Midianites. They sold him for 20 pieces of silver. When Reuben, the oldest, came back, he's like, where is he? What did you do with him? And then they had to lie to their father and say, oh, wild animal got him. Here's his coat of many colors. It's got blood all over it. Boop, that's it. And his father was grieved. He was very sad because Joseph was a favorite. Well, let's skip forward. Let's skip to chapter 39 in Genesis. So Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, he was the captain of the guard, basically bought him. And it says in verse 2 that the Lord was with Joseph. And then skip down to verse 4, and Joseph found grace in his sight. And then down in verse 6, and Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. I encourage you to read this because there's a lot more to it than I'm going to share this morning. But Joseph was blessed. God was looking after him. And so even though he may have been a slave in Egypt, God was keeping an eye on him, and he blessed him. We're going to find out that some things happened because the children are here. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but Joseph was falsely accused of something and got thrown into prison. And in the prison, there was the butler and the baker, and they had dreams. And through the power of God, Joseph was able to interpret those dreams. And he was able to tell them ahead of time what was going to happen. Well, then after the dreams were interpreted, I think it was the butler was restored to his stewardship, where he was a cupbearer for the Pharaoh. And the baker didn't have such a good change of events for him. But Joseph asked both of them when they were returned to their work if they would remember him. Well, did they remember him? No, they didn't. It wasn't until the Pharaoh had the dreams of the kind, and it's in verse 41. The Pharaoh had a dream, and I'll read part of it. He dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine. Now, we would call those cattle, right, John? Kine, I think we'd call them cattle today. And they were well-favored and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So the Pharaoh awoke. Then he slept, and he dreamed a second dream, and he saw 7 ears of corn on one stalk. They were good. And the 7 ears, blasted by the east wind, sprung up after them, and the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 full ears. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit, meaning the Pharaoh, his spirit was troubled. And he called for all the magicians and all the wise men. They couldn't explain it. But then the butler remembered, wait a minute, when we were in prison, this guy interpreted dreams, and he was right on. And so they went and got Joseph. And it's interesting. Let me see if I can find it real quick here. Okay, it's in verse 14. It says, "Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto the Pharaoh." He'd been in prison for quite a while, and so I could imagine to shave and to get cleaned up, they either did it really, really fast, or maybe he didn't get totally cleaned up, but he was able to, through the power of God, interpret Pharaoh's dreams about what they meant. And that's in a few verses later in chapter 41. And Joseph explained what the two dreams meant, and Joseph told him that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt, and in the 7 plenteous years let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let him keep food in the cities. And he went on. And then Pharaoh said, well, okay, who is this guy? Who should I pick? And he realized that he should pick Joseph. And he said, the Pharaoh said unto his servants, "Can we find such as one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?" And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, "Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, "See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck, and made him ride in the 2nd chariot which he had. And they cried before him, "Bow the knee," and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. Well, it's interesting because when this happened, Joseph was 30 years old. So he had been sold by his brothers when he was 17. Maybe I forgot to mention that. He was 17, and he was 30 years old now. So he had been gone for 13 years. And if you go on, and I encourage you to read, because I think that it's important to see that Joseph's dreams were fulfilled, that his brothers did in fact bow down to him, because they didn't realize who he was. But see, God had a plan, and I'm convinced that God has a plan for each of us. And again, from the youngest to the oldest. And I think there are plans for different seasons of our lives. And I'll just maybe interject a testimony here that I'm originally from Ohio, and I was born in Akron, Ohio. My dad got transferred to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and then to Des Moines, and then to Kansas City. And we lived in Kansas City when I was in high school, and then unfortunately my parents got a divorce. And I was ready to go to Graceland at the time. My parents had saved money for over 25 years, and actually my dad was a certified public accountant, and they had saved enough money just to write checks. Now, college is far more expensive today than it was back then, but it was still expensive. And I had planned to go to Graceland. That's where my parents met back in the 1940s after World War II. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. I took it real personal, but I found out that my dad did that to really anger my mom and kind of stick a dagger in and twist it. But I ended up going into the Navy because at that time I wanted to go to medical school. And so that was a different time for me. Well, even when I went to San Diego and then I went overseas to Okinawa, Japan, God was watching over me. You know, I thought that my dad really kind of messed my life up because I had kind of mapped out what I was going to do. Yeah, you want to make God laugh? Plan everything out and say, yeah, this is what's going to happen. Wrong answer. You know, it's his way. It's what he wants and what he needs. So anyway, I went to Okinawa, Japan. I actually worked for the doctor that was second in command of the big Navy hospital there. Oh, I need to tell you, I was engaged at the time. I was engaged to a girl. Her dad was the presiding elder. We lived in Kansas City State at the time. And I was engaged, and I thought, I got this covered. I'm already engaged. I've kind of mapped out what's going to happen. Well, then after I got engaged, I got my patriarchal blessing from Vernon Cornish. We had, I think, 7 patriarchs in Kansas City Stake at the time. And I asked my mom, I said, Mom, how do you pick a patriarch? You know, we went from having no patriarchs to having 7. And I'm like, whoa, how do you do this? And my mom told me, she said, make it a matter of prayer and really think about it and pray about it. And I felt like Vernon was a very spiritual man. And I remember my patriarchal blessing, and he knew that I was engaged, and he knew who I was engaged to. But in my patriarchal blessing, he told me that if I was willing to be led, guided, and directed, that I'd find someone that I'd be happy with, and that God wants us to be happy. And I thought, after I read that, I thought, Vernon, you know I'm already engaged, you know? And you know who I'm engaged to. You know, why didn't you tell me what tribe I'm from or something, you know, else? But I thought, he's a patriarch, I'm not. And so I just kind of kept that to myself. But when I was in San Diego, I read my patriarchal blessing. And when I was in Okinawa, I read my patriarchal blessing. And I thought, all right, God, I thought I had it all figured out, but I don't. I thought, what did you have in mind? And so the more I prayed about it, the more I really studied it and really asked God. And I was willing to be led, guided, and directed. He led me to Kathy, who's now my wife. And I thought 2 things. I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm already engaged. I'm in the wrong church. I can't marry both of them. So I did the right thing. I flew back from Okinawa, Japan, landed in California, flew from San Francisco to Kansas City, and broke up with the young woman that I was engaged to, and went back. And I actually proposed 7 times before Kathy accepted my proposal. I will tell you the first time I proposed, she just laughed. And I thought, well, that's not the response that I expected. And I said, well, will you marry me? And she's like, you're the goofiest guy I've ever met. And I thought, fine, I'll take that. But it's like, will you marry me? Well, I actually had to propose 6 more times. And I think I wore her down. No, I really think that God finally moved on her heart, and we had actually broken up. And she said she didn't want to see me again. And I thought, all right, God, I've made a mess of this. And the more I prayed about it, I thought, all right, I need your help. I broke up with the woman I thought I was supposed to marry. You led me to Kathy, and I had an experience where I felt like he was telling me that I should marry her. It bothered me because she wasn't a member of the church at the time. But if you look at section 111 in the Doctrine and Covenants, and I'll open to that here. All right, section 111, at least in my version, and Cindy, this is actually one that Debbie and Steve gave to me like 50 plus years ago. And I still have it. You can see I put duct tape on it. It's been through a lot of moves. Like I said, we moved 22 times in 12 years. But this section of the Doctrine and Covenants in mine has a preface, and it says, this section on marriage is not a revelation. It was prepared while the book of Doctrine and Covenants was being compiled and was read by W.W. Phelps at the General Assembly of August 17, 1835. It was adopted unanimously by the Assembly as part of the Book of Doctrine and Covenants. It has been retained in every edition of the book published by the reorganization, and the Church knows no other law of marriage than that which is set forth herein. Okay, that first sentence is important. This section on marriage is not a revelation. Well, I don't argue with God, or at least I don't now. When I was a teenager, my mom said, you need to knock it off. You need to basically take what God gives you and say, all right, help me to understand it. Because I almost argued with God, and I'm thankful I didn't get a lightning bolt or whatever was in store. But he reminded me that this section on marriage is not a revelation. This is the understanding of the church. But I thought, Lord, she's not a member of the church. I'll be considered weak in the faith. This is not a good move. And it was like, read it again. And I read it, and I thought, and I read my patriarchal blessing. And I believe that what Vernon Cornish was inspired to share with me almost 50 years ago is true. That if I was willing to be led, guided, and directed, that God would lead me to someone that I'd be happy with. So fast forward, we've been married 46 plus years. We have 5 children. Some of you may know my daughter Amanda. Some of you may know my daughter Bethany, or my sons Luke, Josiah, and Gabriel. We've been very blessed. And I thank God that he led me to Okinawa, Japan, that he led me to Kathy, that she finally agreed to marry me. I had to ask 7 times, so that those of you that are young, just remember that. I've had to pursue her. I still pursue her, to be honest. I thank God. In fact, Bethany, for those of you that may know my second daughter, she's asked me several times, she goes, Dad, do you ever regret marrying Mom? Do you ever wish that you married Sharon? I said, no, not even on our worst day. And I'll tell you why. Sharon married my first cousin. That makes family gatherings really weird. Really weird. And it's like, okay, God. So the point of that is that there are times, and I don't know, maybe you have those, that there are times in my life that I can testify that I thought I knew what God wanted. But then the more that I prayed, the more that I read the scriptures, the more that I fasted, things change. And it's just like with that. I thought when I was 17, I thought, I'm engaged to a presiding elder's daughter, we're going to get married, we're going to do all these fantastic things, and I had it all mapped out. And it all changed. And I think that it's important for us to consider, and I can look back over 68 plus years and see, what is God calling me to? At different times in my life, he's called me to different things, and that's been for a season. When you look at Joseph, and I encourage you to go on and read in Genesis and see that Joseph saved not only Egypt, but he saved his own family. That God placed him in the positions that he was in, even though I'm sure getting thrown into a pit, even though there was no water in it, and then getting sold, to the Ishmaelites, taken to Egypt, working in the captain of the guard's house, and then getting thrown into prison. Those are not fun things. Those are not things that you'd put on your to-do list to spiritually accomplish. But those are things that happened to Joseph. Well, I'd like to maybe invite you to consider some other people in the scriptures that have had different experiences and the things that God called them to. All right, and the first is Enoch. And I encourage you to go back in the Inspired Version and look at, I think it's chapters 5 through 7. Let me double check that real quick here. Okay, it is 5 through 7. And read, I've got all kinds of markings in mine, how God blessed Enoch and the things that he called Enoch to do. And of course we know I think it's in the 7th chapter, let me double check that too. It's at the end of the 7th chapter, verses 70. But let me go back to the 7th chapter, verses 23. And the Lord called his people Zion, because they were of one heart and one mind, and dwelt in righteousness, and there was no poor among them. Well, I think if we read, and I've started going back to read in Genesis, especially the chapters 5 through 7, because I feel like, and it's interesting, Dane, because you were talking about the things that are going on in the world, and I've been really concerned about that. We have 5 children, as I mentioned. We have 13 grandchildren. Gabriel's not married yet, so he said, Dad, I'll give you 5 more grandchildren. I said, well, whoever you married, has something to say about that too. And he goes, if they don't want 5, forget them. I'm like, Gabriel. And he goes, Dad, you're one of 5. I'm one of 5. I want to have 5. And it's like, Gabriel, you need to think about that and pray about that. And it's like, yep, I will. But if she's not interested Jesus in heaven 5, boom, going on down the road. And I'm like, Gabriel, and he goes, Dad, you want me to waste my time with somebody? I know actually a young couple, and this is really sad, that before they got married, she said, oh yes, I want to have children, at least 3. And after they got married, it's like, no, I don't want to have any children. And unfortunately, it ended in divorce because he really wanted children. She had misled him before the marriage and thought, we're in safe territory now. I don't want to have kids, and that's it. You're done. You're out of here. Well, unfortunately, he was out of there. And that's sad. But it's interesting because, Gabriel realized that, I was one of 5. Cindy knows my older sister really well. My older sisters are both in the Community of Christ Church, both priesthood members, and that grieves me. My mom was alive when my sister Vicky was called the office of high priest, and Mom wanted me to go out to Virginia where Vicky was living at the time, and I said, Mom, I can't. I love my sisters, but I can't. And she said, I'm your mother. What if I make you go? I said, Mom, you can't. I'm not doing it. I said, the church has changed. She had been away from the church for over 20 years. And I said, Mom, when you have 4 hours or more, we can talk about all the changes. And my mom made time, and it actually took 5 hours. And she goes, I had no idea the church has changed this much. I said, Mom, it's changed, and I can't go. I just can't. But it's interesting because I still pray for my sisters. I still pray for them that they will understand that it's not entertainment. My one sister, it's all about entertainment, and it's unfortunate, and I'll just share one thing. She showed me pictures one time of an Easter service, and at Cameron Restoration Branch, we call it Resurrection Sunday. And my sister had a picture, and she was actually preaching, and she had bunny ears on, and she talked about the Easter bunny. I said, Vicki, please tell me that you didn't talk about that on Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. She's like, Glen, get with the program. And I thought, we're not about entertainment. We're about spiritual awareness, spiritual education, salvation. And it was like, Glen, you don't get it. And I said, Vicki, I don't think you get it. This isn't about entertaining people. And it grieves me because I think at least some of the time for her it's about entertainment. But I think that, and this gets into something else that I was reminded of this morning, and I'd like to read it. It's in Genesis, the 3rd chapter. Okay, this is one of those things, it's in the inspired version, it's not in the King James Version. I'd like to read for your hearing Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Okay, mine, it says, the rebellion of Satan, man's agency, temptation, and fall. I'll read for your hearing. And I, the Lord God, spake unto Moses, saying, that Satan whom thou hast commanded in the name of mine only begotten is the same which was from the beginning. And he came before me, saying, behold, send me, I will be thy son, and I will redeem all mankind, that one soul shall not be lost, and surely I will do it. Wherefore give me thine honor. But behold, my beloved son, which was my beloved and chosen from the beginning, said unto me, Father, thy will be done, and the glory be thine forever. Wherefore, because that Satan rebelled against me, and sought to destroy the agency of man, which I, the Lord God, had given him, and also that I should give unto him mine own power. By the power of mine only begotten I caused that he should be cast down, and he became Satan, yea, even the devil, the father of all lies, to deceive and to blind men, and to lead them captive at his will, even as many as would not hearken unto my voice. I'm a teacher, so I'm going to read that again. I think it's very important, especially the 5th verse, for you to pay attention to. Yea, even the devil, the father of all lies, to deceive and to blind men, and to lead them captive at his will, even as many as would not hearken unto my voice. Well, I think it's important for us to look at that passage that he is the father of all lies. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I'd heard people say, that's just a little white lie. as opposed to a whopper that maybe a politician might say. But I think, this doesn't distinguish. He says he's the father of all lies, that he wants to deceive and to blind men and to lead them captive at his will, even as many as would not hearken unto my voice. I think it's important, and I'll share something with you that in my patriarchal blessing, Vernon Cornish, I think, was inspired to share that the work that Satan is trying to do is to destroy the church. And in order to destroy the church, he has to destroy individuals. Unfortunately, and I don't know what your area is like down here, but I know around Cameron, unfortunately, he's destroyed some individuals. He's destroyed some individuals I never thought that they would be in the situation that they're in. But I think that we need to realize that Satan, he lies. He wants to deceive people. He wants to blind them. And so I would encourage you, as you think about what God is calling you to do, is pray that you'll be aware spiritually that Satan is out there trying to destroy the work of the kingdom. He's trying to destroy the work that the church is called to do, and in order to do that, he'll destroy individuals. And sometimes he'll get in just a little crack, and sometimes he'll do some things, and other times he'll just almost figuratively or spiritually cause people to explode or implode. And I think that's something that we need to be aware of. Again, that passage is only in the inspired version. It's not in the King James Version. But I think it's important for us to look at that and then to be prepared spiritually, that we would seek God out, that we would pray for a hedge of protection spiritually, that we would pray that God would bless us, bless our families. I know in my own personal prayers, I pray for not only our children and our grandchildren, but for all the people in the restoration, because there is spiritual warfare. That's probably a sermon for another time, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. But there is spiritual warfare that goes on. And I think sometimes I don't see it, but then there are sometimes I sense it and I feel it. And I think it's important for us to realize, what is God calling you to do? And it may be something that could be radically different. You look at Enoch, and his preaching and his work, and that he was actually taken up with Zion. You look at Noah, and I'm going to mention something, and hopefully this comes out right. We went to see the Ark in Kentucky. I was impressed. Some of the things, I think they got pretty close. Some of the things I'm not sure of. Well, then recently we watched that movie. Who was the actor, Kathy? Crow? And it was on Netflix, and we watched it, and I thought, wait a minute here, they've taken some liberties, and this is a little bit different than the scriptures tell us. And then we got to a point where, he was going to kill his sons and daughters, and I thought, whoa, stop right there. This is like really bizarre, and that's not following the scriptures. And we chose not to watch the last, 30 or 40 minutes. Because I think that, again, Satan is the father of all lies. He wants to blind and deceive. And I think Noah was a pretty brave guy. He says in Genesis that he preached, even though the sons of men were like, get out of here. We know what we're doing, and we're just like gods, and thought, no, you're not. And to build something like that ark, and I thought, didn't have power tools. But then I think, and we couldn't figure out exactly, in one class that I was in, I think it took like 120 years to build the ark. And I'm like, whoa, that's a long time. And without power tools, it'd probably take me 250 years. But I thought Noah was faithful, and he was faithful, and his 3 sons, and they went in, they gathered the animals, and they went in, and Noah did what God asked him to do. And there are like 50 other examples, and I'm just going to mention some, because I think some of you may identify with some of the characters in the Old Testament. Some may identify with others. For the women, there was Naomi and Ruth. And I remember when I was younger, they used that scripture all the time from Ruth. Let me see if I can find it. I hadn't planned on mentioning it. Basically, she says, whither thou goest, I will go, and that I will basically follow you. Well, she wasn't of the faith that Naomi was, but Ruth ended up, being the mother of one of the, is it progenitors? That's before, right? Yep. Okay. One of the progenitors of King David and of the line of Jesus. And so I think that we need to look at that and see that she was very faithful and she stayed with her mother-in-law. You look at Hannah in, I think it's the first book of Samuel. She just wanted to have one child. And Eli, the high priest, thought she was drunk. And she said, no, I'm just grieved in my spirit. I just want one child. And it's interesting, and I didn't realize this until yesterday. She had Samuel. She dedicated him to the Lord. Samuel ended up, let me mention the first thing. He went to Eli, the high priest, and Samuel didn't know what the Lord sounded like. Didn't know what his voice was. He kept thinking it was Eli, the high priest. And finally, Eli realized, he said, say, "Hear my Lord." And he told him. And it wasn't good news for Eli. It was about his two sons. But it's interesting because fast forward then, Samuel became a prophet. He went to anoint the next king. And I hadn't planned on mentioning this either. He went to anoint the next king. And he thought, I'll anoint David's brother. He's tall, he's ruggedly handsome. And the Lord told him, he said, men look at the outer. I look at the heart. I think that's important for us to know too. Each of us look different, and I would imagine that's for a reason. I'm not sure, but it's like, all right, each of us are different, but our heart is what's most important. Where we are with the Lord, that's what's most important. We can look at Samuel, who became a prophet and anointed David to be king. We can look at David, who was just a very humble shepherd boy, but later on when you look, and yes, he had problems. He sinned. He fell short of what God wanted him to do, but he was a man after God's own heart. And so I think we need to look at that. We need to say, all right, are we like David? Well, I'm a sinner. I fall short. I'm thankful that my wife doesn't stand up and say how short I fall. We'd be here till the sun sets tonight, and then probably through the night. I struggle. There were things that I thought when we got married over 46 years ago that I'd do. I'll mention a couple of them. They're pretty funny. I thought I wanted to be involved in every decision. I wanted to be involved in painting the kitchen and choosing the china and choosing this and choosing that. And then after probably less than 3 months, I thought, forget it. Just feed me, paint the kitchen, whatever color you want, do whatever you want. I've got other things that I need to do. We've been adjusting things, and things that we do in our marriage may not work for you. And I'm not going to ask, well, I guess John left, but John's probably been married, 60, 65 years? Okay. I'm not going to ask, but I know that we've changed, and there are things that we do now that we didn't do early on. In fact, our oldest daughter, Amanda, told me one time, she goes, you and Mom are different. She goes, you're doing things with the grandchildren that you wouldn't let us do. And I said, we learned something. And it's like, after 5 children, and then, of course, the 13 grandchildren, it's like you kind of figure some things out, sometimes by trial and error. But there were different seasons of our lives, and there were things that we did early on that we wouldn't do now because we realized that it's really important, like with our grandchildren, to hug them. I've got a grandson that, how old is Thomas, Kathy? 11? Almost 12? He still hugs me. I love that. And I realized that when he becomes a teenager, he may not do that anymore. But I love that, and I cherish that. And I think it's important. Whatever season of life you're in, whatever season of life I'm in, to ask God, what is it that you want me to do? Because things that I'm doing now, I didn't do when I was younger. When I was in the military, I thought, man, everything's just wonderful. I was in the Navy when I met Kathy. Then I saw the light, and I joined the Air Force. And that was great. I was supposed to be a hospital administrator. Air Force put me into nuclear weapons. I'm like, what? But it's always the needs of the military. And I thought, all right, God, there's a purpose. I don't know what it is. Well, we ended up going to South Dakota. And I will tell you, because this is kind of funny. So we went up from Vandenberg Air Force Base on the coast of California. We went up to South Dakota. The colonel I worked for forgot to tell me that it was the Sturgis Motorcycle Classic that was going on. So we're driving up to South Dakota, and I see all these bikers, and I see Hell's Angels and gangs, and I'm thinking, God, where are we going? And we get up there, and he goes, oh, Crowther, by the way, I forgot to tell you the Sturgis Motorcycle Classic with 50,000 bikers from all over the United States just ended. And I'm like, thanks, Colonel. Appreciate that. Because I thought we were going into like the gates of hell. And I thought, yeah, I'm not ready for that right now, maybe in a couple of years. But God's good. And he blessed us, you know, even in nuclear weapons, he blessed us. We met some fine people. I had some excellent squadron commanders that I would walk over hot coals for, and I wouldn't do that for many people. But it's interesting how in my life there's been different seasons. And I would submit, even for those of you that are younger, that you're going to have different seasons. You know, that passage in Ecclesiastes, when it mentioned, you know, that there was a time to love and a time to hate. I don't fully understand that, because God is a God of love. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful forces. I believe that it's even more powerful than nuclear weapons. Now, I'm not going to prove that because you could have some really serious problems. But I believe that when God talks about love and when he talks about the greatest commandment, that we're to love God with all of our heart, might, mind, and strength, and we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. If we really understood that, I think that would be almost like understanding Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, which is the speed of, gosh, I'm a science teacher and I'm going to booger this up. Speed of light?
186,000.
Yeah.
Miles per second.
Miles per second, thank you. And it's like, if we understood that, you know, we could really harness a tremendous amount of energy. But I believe love is part of that equation. And I believe that if we love God with all of our heart, might, mind, and strength, that we'll be able to accomplish things that we didn't think were possible. And so I would encourage you, and I'll give Dane, I actually spent some time yesterday after I got my sermon ready and my scriptures. I actually pulled out of the Old Testament, the New Testament, I think it's 30 or more people that you could possibly identify with. You know, I found like not only David, you know, fighting Goliath, and you think of the size difference, and you think of how even the warriors, the experienced warriors of the Israelite people, they didn't want to go out to face Goliath. They're like, you're nuts. And he went out with a sling and smooth stones. And he told people, he said, the battle is the Lord's. Indeed it is. And I think if you look through, and Daniel in the lion's den, there have been times where I felt like I was in a spiritual lion's den. There have been times where I thought, okay, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were thrown into the fiery furnace, it's like, I've been close to that. Not my choosing, but God protected them. God made it possible for them. It says that you couldn't even smell the smoke on their garments, and they weren't hurt. God can do some pretty awesome things. And I think as each of us look at what God is calling us to do, we really need to ask, right, what resources do I have? What do you want me to do? How do you want me to do it? Because even in the Book of Mormon, you look at Lehi, who initially left all of his wealth there. I mean, thankfully it was there for his sons to go back and to gather up to get the plates, and then they got the sword of Laban. But he left, I mean, just like Abraham in the Old Testament, left his homeland to go where God wanted him to go. You look at Nephi and Nephi's interpretation of Lehi's dreams. You look at, and I'm not a real fan of this, but I guess if God says do it, then you do it. Abinadi got burned, literally burned. But he shared his testimony. He shared what the Lord wanted him to share. And we know at least one person was listening and their life was changed, and that's Alma. And so even if that's the case, I mean, that's not something, no offense, maybe Dane wants to put that on his resume. I don't really want to put it on mine. But then in all honesty, if that's what God said, that's what you need to do. And if you love me, you'll do that. Then I would do that. Because I think there are times that God tests us and he challenges us, okay? Just like with Abraham and Isaac. You know, how much do you love me? What are you willing to do for me? And I would invite each of you to think about what it is that God wants you to do. You know, whether you're young or old. You know, I'm reminded of of a woman, and I'm not sure how old she was. She could have been actually younger than me. But she thought, well, I really can't do anything. Old age was catching up with her. And so she would pray. And she actually went around an abortion clinic, and she prayed as she walked around the abortion clinic. And she thought, all right, Lord, this is all I can do. Well, she walked around the abortion clinic, and then one day, all the women came outside from inside. And the woman said, what's going on? They go, well, doctor isn't coming today. And she thought, that's weird. The doctors always come. Well, then, like the next week, she was walking around and she was praying. And they came out again, and she goes, what's going on? Well, doctor's not coming again today. Well, then the third week, she was walking around and she was praying, and they all came out and they said, the doctor's not coming at all. We're going to have to close the clinic. And she realized that she had been praying and that she had asked people to pray for her. And I thought, so we can't limit God in saying, oh, you have to be young, physically fit, run 100 meters in 9.1, which would be like Olympic speed. Even if you can just pray, or you can call people, or you can send text messages, or you can send email messages, whatever. There's power in prayers. And I'd like to, should I look at my watch here? 2 testimonies about prayer, because this is really important. So Bethany, and some of you know my daughter Bethany, she's married to Krista Selms. So Bethany, about 25 years ago, came to me and she said, Dad, when are we having more kids? I said, well, Bethany, you're not involved in making that decision. We have Amanda and Bethany and Luke and Josiah, 4 kids. That's good. I said, we're done. She goes, no, you and Mom have this parent thing down. She goes, I want twin sisters. I said, Bethany, this isn't like Chick-fil-A. You drive up, I want a number 1, number 2, and twin sisters to go. And I said, Bethany, she goes, Dad, you and Mom are really doing this really good parent thing. She goes, I want twin sisters. Well, then she said 2 things. The first really concerned me. Second really scared me. The first, she said, Dad, she goes, I'm going to pray that you have twin girls. I thought, oh, Bethany, don't do that. Well, then she said, I'm going to get 40 of my friends to pray that you have twin girls. I said, Bethany, please don't do that. Things happen when that many kids start praying about one thing. Well, then a month later, my wife, who's really easygoing, she came to me and she said, we need to talk. Sit down. Well, I knew what that meant, so I'm doing the math thinking, oh boy, if it's twin girls, I got college to pay for, 2 weddings, 2 cars. I'm going to have to get a paper route or go to work for the Mondays and make some extra money because this is going to be really expensive. And I said, sweetheart, are you pregnant? And she goes, just sit down. And so I asked her 3 times, and finally, my wife doesn't talk like this. She goes, shut up and sit down. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. She goes, I am pregnant, but that's not the only surprise. And I thought, oh God, it's twins. She goes, nope, I want to have this baby at home. And you don't know, because I didn't tell you, I was a corpsman in the Navy. I was supposed to observe a delivery. Well, the doctor thought he had 15 minutes, and he only had 5, and I actually caught the baby. And it's like I wasn't even married, and I thought, this is not what I want to do at this point in my life. But I thought, all right. She wanted to have the baby at home, and I thought, no. Amanda and Bethany were both C-sections. The older boys were VBAC. Now, I found out from the midwife that if the doctors had waited, I think both of them had golf games that day. And I was a junior officer in the Air Force. I couldn't say a lot because these guys were like majors or lieutenant colonels. But I thought, okay, I'm really not comfortable with having a baby at home. But she said something to the effect like, my mind's made up. Let me translate for you. It's like trying to blow out a light bulb. It's not going to happen. So I thought, please, can we find a midwife, that has experience and we can learn some things from, and God blessed us. We learned a lot. Gabriel was born on our couch almost 24 years ago. Gabriel at birth, those of you that haven't had children, plug your ears. Gabriel weighed 11 pounds. He looked like Hoss Cartwright when he came out. I thought, all the newborn clothes are going back. He's going to wear 6 to 12-month clothes. Oh, Gabriel's still a big guy. He's like 6'5", 6'6", probably weighs 275. And I'm like, okay, all right. I thought we were done. Gabriel was a real blessing. Now, I will tell you that unlike, Joseph, he was, the child of his father's old age. Gabriel is a child of my old age, but I love all 5 of our children. One other testimony, and I'll try to be real brief, is my mother-in-law unfortunately died in a freak car accident in California over 40 years ago. We got my wife on a plane to fly out to California, and excuse me, I'm mixing testimonies here. Okay, so my mother-in-law died in a freak car accident. Well, then my father-in-law, a few years later, remarried, moved up to Portland, Oregon area, and wanted to settle up there. His son, Kathy's younger brother, is a doctor, and they were going to live in that area. Well, we got a call, and it was from her stepmother, and she said that the doctor said he had 24 hours to live. And so we got Kathy on a plane, and I thought, your mom's gone. You need to go and see your dad before he passes. Because I found out later there were like 7 doctors that said he had less than 24 hours to live. Well, the last thing Kathy told me before we got her on a plane at Kansas City to fly out to Portland, she said, call your mom. My mom was alive then, and she said, call your mom. And my mom had these women, she called them her church lady friends. And she goes, have your mom call the church ladies and pray for my dad. And so I got the 5 kids ready. Gabriel was just a little guy. He was, 18 months. Anyway, I got everything ready. We were fully expecting to go to my father-in-law's funeral, but I thought, buying short notice airline tickets for 5 kids and 2 adults would be pretty expensive. So I got her on the plane, and we were driving out, and I called my mom. That was one of the last things I did before we left our home. I said, Mom, my father-in-law is in a serious way. The doctors all agree he has less than 24 hours to live. I said, would you call your church lady friends and ask them to pray for my father-in-law? Well, my mom said, okay, there's 55 church lady friends, but she said 5 of them pray to somebody else. I said, Mom, call the 50 first. If they pray to God, call them first. I don't know about the other ones. I'll leave that up to you. But I said, definitely call the 50 first. And so she said she would do that. Well, we drove, and some of you may understand this. We live up by Cameron, Missouri, and I drove at night because with 5 kids, I thought, I needed to concentrate, and so I drove at night. We drove to western Nebraska, and I told Amanda, she's our oldest, I said, Amanda, I need to sleep at least 8 hours. I said, I'm normally a Motel 6 kind of guy, but we stayed at like a Best Western because they had all-you-could-eat buffet. And I said, let me sleep 8 hours. You take your siblings, to eat breakfast. And she goes, Dad, Gabriel's like breastfed. What are we going to do? I said, don't feed him peanuts or grapes. Let him eat whatever else he wants. I said, I'll deal with your mom when we get to Portland. So I got to sleep 8 hours. Amanda woke me up and she goes, Dad, Gabriel. And I'm like, is he okay? She goes, yeah, he ate like a whole plate of blueberries. I said, all right. I said, I'll change his diapers. I said, that adds new meaning to the words toxic waste. And I said, I'll change his diapers from here on out. But I said, we need to get going. And so we got going. And for those of you that know, this is in February. I thought, we're going to cross western Nebraska. We go up to Cheyenne. We over the mountain to Laramie. And I thought, it's February. We could have snow. We had a ground blizzard. And I thought, God, we were in a Ford E350 van, rear wheel drive. I forgot to grab chains, and I thought, God, I need some help. And we drove. Unfortunately, we saw a lot of car accidents. We had a yellow freight dual trailer almost come through the median and hit us head on. And I just had time to say, God, please, I'd go first. I'd be gone. But then the kids would be in a van, and it was like freezing weather. God blessed us. Every time I thought of getting off, either the exit was closed, or one time there was a gasoline tanker ready to roll over. It was about halfway over, and I thought, I heard that propane tanks are really thick. You can roll those things over and they can get back up and go. Gasoline tankers, on the other hand, are thin-skinned, and I thought, I don't want to be in the same vicinity if that thing blows up. We got safely across Wyoming. It took a lot longer than I thought. Those of you that are younger, and hopefully none of you that are older do this, I used to say, it can't get any worse. I don't say that anymore. Don't say that, because I said that and my kids heard me. Well, then the defroster went out and I thought, God, I'm really sorry. Can you turn the defroster back on? And we had to use a blow dryer, and I had a little opening. So I don't say that anymore, so don't say that, because it can get worse. Anyway, we got across Wyoming. It splits. You can go to Salt Lake City and go on Interstate 80, or you can go up to, Ogden on 84. And we get down, and I think we went to a Perkins or a Denny's, and I called my wife, fully expecting that her dad had passed during the day. And it sounds like a party. And I thought, you kids are cold-blooded. Your dad just dies and you're having a party? I said, what are you doing? She goes, I'm not telling you anything. Call your mom. Find out how many people were praying for Dad. I said, what's going on? She goes, just do what I say. Okay, yes, dear, I learned. I'll do that. So I called my mom. She said there was one group of women. I think they're in a church on Paseo. And that's really not a nice area of Kansas City. But there are some prayer warriors. There were 50 ladies on their knees within 5 minutes. Well, my mom called all of them, found out there were over 500 people praying for my father-in-law. So I called back and I said, all right, what's going on? And she said, if I got this right, the orthopedic surgeon was a believer, and they fully expected to see everything: cardiac activity, kidney output, lungs, whole 9 yards. Everything was going to go downhill. And he noticed during the day, and we were driving, so I didn't know this, everything started going up. And I guess he said something, and I think it was the nephrologist was not a believer, and he goes, why do you people always bring God into this? And the orthopedic surgeon is like, he's the one that created us, let's give credit where credit's due. But anyway, everything improved. They fully expected that he would have died because, I'll try not to go into too much detail, his knee was hot to the touch, which is really a bad sign. A year before, he had had orthopedic surgery, and they had adhesions, which is scar tissue. Well, the doctor that did the original joint implant actually designed it. He had the patents on those joints, but he's not the one that went in and did the revision. It was like a new guy in their group right out of residency. Well, something happened, and they don't know what it was, but for a year, and we didn't know this until after the fact, a year, my father-in-law's knee was hot to the touch. That's really a sign of infection. So anyway, they took him into the operating room, did an arthroscopic procedure, got a quart jar of pus out of one knee. Well, the doctor said that's going to destroy his heart, destroy his liver, destroy his kidneys, his lungs, everything else. And that's when they said, that's it, he's done. But God had a different plan. The reason that I mention that is because both with Bethany, with 40 of her friends joining her in prayer, and in praying for my father-in-law, the prayer, and I don't know who's responsible for this. I'm not mad, but I think it's really cool that on your prayer list you have 50 people? I think that's awesome because things happen when we join together in prayer. And I'll be praying for them, and I'd ask that you pray for me. I'm going to retire from working for the state at the end of this month, but I'm jumping out of the proverbial frying pan into the fire, and I'll be teaching middle school science at Mid-Buchanan. It's south of St. Joe. Now, I've had people tell me, you're crazy. Anybody that goes to teach middle school, I apologize to any of you that are in middle school, okay? But it's that's where I feel like my talents lie. I'm going to actually be teaching life science, which I really enjoy because I was a corpsman in the Navy, and then I was a LVN, which is like an LPN. But it's exciting to me, and I think it's exciting because there's a lot of potential there. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to bear witness of Jesus Christ. I would pray for you, and if you would allow me, and I apologize if I've gone way late, I'd like to pray for each of you in closing, if you would bow with me. Oh God, our Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. Father, I thank you for the opportunity that I've had to come and share those things that you laid on my heart. Father, I would pray for each person that's under the sound of my voice, from the youngest to the oldest. And Father, I'd pray that you would move upon them and that you would impress upon them what you would have them do. Father, there are people at various stages in life. We have young children, Father, that may be in elementary school or even middle school or high school. We have some that may be in college, some that may be starting out their life, some middle-aged, some empty nesters, and some seniors. Father, I'd ask that you would bless each person. Father, that they would see more clearly what you would have them do. Father, you have endowed each of us with gifts and with talents. And Father, I'd pray for each person that each of us would use those gifts and talents that you've given to us for your glory and for your honor. Father, help us to know what to do and what to say and when to do it and when to say it. Father, there are people that are spiritually dying every day. There are people that are physically dying. Father, help us to do what we can through your power. Father, to do those things, to bring them not only to a knowledge of your Son, Jesus Christ, but to a knowledge and an understanding of what your purpose is in their lives. Father, bless us and strengthen us. Father, I'd ask that each of us would be engaged, and we may become weary. But Father, help us to always be engaged and to be about the work that you call us to do. Father, I'd ask that you'd bless each person in this part of the vineyard. Father, that they would be laborers and sons and daughters for you. Father, I'd ask that you'd bless each of us and strengthen us for the tasks that lie ahead, and that you would continue to reveal yourself to us and reveal the plan that you have for us each day. Father, bless us, strengthen us. I give you the praise and the glory and the honor. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.